Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome once again to Redemption Meditations. I'm Lee, joined as is typical, but not always guaranteed, Dana and Steve. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
What's up, boys?
Welcome
Sup?
back.
Just
Yes,
when
we're
you
back
thought
from.
you were rid of us.
One of the questions that we got was, what did you do on your summer vacation? We're not going to answer that question tonight.
That is privileged information,
That's right.
but it
None of
was
your
a long
business.
and painful
It's
hiatus.
classified.
So we thought for the first episode back from our summer vacay was to have a very special guest, an illustrious guest, fellow elder at RBC, and I must say, in demand podcast guest, Chad Lump. Good evening, sir.
I am so glad you guys could work this out with my agent and get me on this evening. I was looking forward to it.
Your fees
We're
were
gonna
tremendous, I have to
we're gonna
say.
cut you in on the same percentage we all get.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have that to look forward to.
Wait, we're splitting it 25% now?
Sure. Yeah.
We're splitting a bag of chips from Chipotle.
There you go.
So we've done a couple of these episodes before of the how did we get here type of episode, and so I think just to kick off this episode with Chad, Chad, how did you get here?
Well, it seems like a long time ago, but it's really not that long ago when you put it in the span of time. But my testimony, uh, it sounds kind of simple. You hear great testimonies from many wonderful people, and sometimes we think ours is a little lacking, but it really isn't. Um, God is a awesome God, and he did wonderful things in my life. But as many as stories go, and I kind of think as Steve's story goes, my leading to my salvation, I was chasing a girl. You know,
Mhm.
I was interested in Annette, who is now my wife, and she was not interested in me, but I was able to wear her down and get her to lower her standards. And once I got my little I got in the crack, I got in the avenue somehow. She invited me to youth group. So it kind of all started there. I can still remember the house we went to. The guy that was in her class, his name was Brent Flynn. I went there not to meet the Lord, but to see a girl, and that was kind of my catch into. She was glad to have me as long as I came to youth group. So that kind of grew into church, and our relationship grew. So it's kind of like my testimony has kind of disappeared over the years, and we've been together so long, we kind of have a mutual testimony. And maybe one day we'll both sit down, because I think it's a fabulous testimony when you get us both together. But so we started dating, and we were typical. I would put us as typical everyday young boy, young girl, 16, um, dating, going out. We didn't have licenses yet, but so every chance we had to get together, we did. Usually at school functions, and I don't know if any of your listeners even know what long distance phone calls are. So we could talk once a week. I was allowed to call her once a week. She was allowed to call me once a week. So eventually we got kind of active in a youth group there in New Hampshire, the town, a small town outside of Lakeview, going into Waynesfield. She's from Waynesfield, and ended up going to church camp. And I can remember going to church camp, and it was probably my second year at church camp. So Lakeside, up on Lake Erie, we sat through something that night. After dinner, you go and listen to someone speak, and then we go back to our cabins and we have devotions. And I remember during devotions, Pastor West Bay from but then the Methodist Church in New Hampshire, he gave a lesson that kind of stirred my heart, and I professed my life to the Lord. And I was in there with lots of people, probably a dozen of us. So Annette was already saved. She recommitted her life to Christ. I was just brand new. I committed my life to Christ, and I remember everyone in the room having a real emotional experience, and I didn't. It was kind of a matter of fact decision I made with the Lord. And for a long time after that, because I didn't have that emotional feeling, I really doubted my salvation. When I felt like I wasn't living like the Lord wanted me to, I felt like, well, maybe I wasn't saved. But now, my hindsight is much clearer, and I can see the Lord working in my life long before that. So I can say that's a pinpoint day, but I would not say that's the day I was saved. My life really didn't change. I still did everything I wanted to do. I ran around with a rowdy crowd. But the only thing different is I did have the Holy Spirit in my life, because I could tell with conviction, and now I was very knowledgeable of the things I was doing. Whereas before I wasn't. I was just doing what everyone else does. And now I was very knowledgeable of sin, and maybe because my life no longer belongs to me, that I shouldn't be doing some of these things that I continue to do. So, and it wasn't a overnight process. It was over a few years that I settled into my faith, and we're always maturing. So then, I can go on and on about, eventually Annette and I, we got married. Let me back that up a little bit. I don't want to go too far into this because we have a great testimony together. But Annette and I living our lives. Annette became pregnant before we were married, and so that was a real growth point in both of our lives, because we didn't come from Christian backgrounds, but we had loving families. My dad passed away when I was a freshman, but my mom worked hard and was loving and caring, and Annette's parents were loving and caring as well. But we didn't have that solid background of Christian faith. So we were learning on the fly. So a lot went into that, and where the world was very accepting of our situation, it would have been easy for us to draw into the world and say, we don't need anyone to be condemning or preachy to us. But we really weren't that way, because we belonged to the Lord, and our life took a fresh start then, and we kind of rededicated our lives to the Lord. And sorry about my age. All right, I'm back. Yeah. So, any questions? Any questions? Any more details you want? Because I can talk for a long time, because the Lord has truly been fascinating in Annette and I's life. So there's an old adage that says, I wasn't going to jail, but I was going to hell. Yeah. And the Lord plucked me out of the world.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dana. Did you have a question?
What brought you from the church in New Hampshire, Ohio, to then Logansville?
Okay, so we had Danny, our firstborn, and I remember sitting in the Methodist church, and I loved Pastor West Bay, and then as the Methodists do, we got another pastor, and I really can't remember his name, but it was kind of our home. It was kind of our home church, and I remember him announcing that he was leaving, and one of the deacons got up and said they met the new pastor, and she's really great. and I remember looking around and thinking, did he say she? And like no one else was caught off guard. Now, I'm not a mature Christian.
This is like mid 1990s, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so yeah, it was a woman pastor, and we sat under the pastor for a year. But really, I struggled and was challenged. And she even married us. I mean, we were married by a woman pastor. Lee thinks we need to redo that, but
Doesn't count.
Not valid.
I think it took. But we struggled and we were, so we're too young. We're a young couple who within 1 year we had got married, bought a house, and had a kid. So the world is a whirlwind, and we are truly relying on the Lord. And I could share story after story after story that are just awesome. But we were looking for a church, and I care. I think I talked to a few people in DeGraff and Logansville had a WANA program going on at the time, and we kind of went out and checked it out, and we went there and we didn't look back. We called it home. We felt right at home. We knew people were there. It was definitely teaching the word, and we grew quite a bit, and we're growing every day. So that's kind of what brought us to Logansville. New Hampshire. So the church in New Hampshire, that was Annette's home church, and that's where she drugged me, and then that's where I accepted the Lord. But it was a hard move, but it was a good move. It was a great move for us.
So so many people, and you were talking about people's conversion stories, but a lot of them end up being described, at least described, if not like this is the fullness of what happened, are usually talked about in like purely emotional terms.
Yeah.
Will you flesh out a little bit about the non-emotionness of that and how that came to make sense and be recognizable to you as a valid conversion without having to walk some sort of sawdust trail or you know.
And I don't, I was listening to a lot, different preaching, John MacArthur and other people that I can't even remember the names are. So, I was wanting to draw in, and somewhere quickly along the line, through biblical aspect, I learned that your emotion has nothing to do with it. And it went clear back to that moment that it was a business transaction, and Jesus Christ did it all. He paid the price. I just accepted the gift he gave, and so the lack of emotion that I felt made me doubt my salvation. When I look back now and think, it was a serious moment when my life now belongs to the Lord, who paid the price, and I became recognizable of that at a certain moment. Although he was working in my life before that, so I think that's a great topic as far as emotion. I think maybe even a podcast could be dedicated to that. Is how emotion and mental health is a situation in our environment today. But we run into so many people who want to feel like Christians, and they're chasing that feeling, and many times we don't feel like Christians, because we're putting it all on ourselves, and then when we realize it's all on Jesus Christ, it comes home.
Yeah, I think this is something that is worthwhile pointing out to the folks listening, is that we don't want to sort of put our stock in the intensity of emotion I felt at the moment, or what I perceive to be the moment of conversion. And so that's how I know it's legitimate. Because unfortunately, there's an awful lot of examples of people who had, they went to camp and the lights were turned down and the music was turned up, and they had a very emotional moment. And then so many years later, they just left the faith. And so if we're looking at that, we're probably not looking at something that is our focus is better served elsewhere. And I think your story actually does provide an example of something that I think is more helpful, in that at one point in your life, you were in the midst of something that you shouldn't have been doing and dealing with the consequences of that, and didn't flee the church, which would be so
I'm
a
glad
very
you.
normal human thing to do. If someone in the church comes to you and says, I'm worried about you, what's going on with you? The knee jerk response is to get out of there, man. I don't want to be here, but not for believers, or at least shouldn't be for believers. And that's not the end all be all, right? And sometimes it's a very rocky up and down road, but that's more reliable than just I was really emotional when I was 15 at camp one time. I don't love that. That's concerning if that's where we're hanging our hat on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you, Steve, for saying at one point, because the truth is there are many points when, when we catch ourselves down. But I respect you saying
we're all in this boat together, buddy.
Yeah.
We all have a seat on the struggle bus.
We all have our oh God, have mercy on me.
Through the process, I remember you saying a long time ago now that you never something to the effect that you never really questioned God's goodness or his kindness toward you, even if you kind of struggle with salvation. Is that right? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. You know, one of my favorite books is Ecclesiastes, and I often think, and if you have your Bible there, I thought we were testing today. I didn't know we were going to do a talk, but you have your Bible there. I think it's Ecclesiastes 5:20. What it and I'm kind of paraphrasing here. It's the Lord gave me gladness at heart, so I don't spend my time reflecting on the past. And I think the Lord, and I'm a very nostalgic person. It would be easy for me to reflect on the past, but yeah, the Lord's goodness has been so recognizable, even in times when you would think it's not. It's just you see His hand at work in many ways.
Yeah. So, your dad died when you were young.
Yeah.
Like sometimes people will use a tragedy in their life as an excuse to kind of say God isn't kind or, he hasn't been good to me. But so you're right. That is pretty much what Ecclesiastes 5 says. So the ESV says, "For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with the joy in his heart."
Yeah.
The joy that we're going through now, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's been difficult things in the past, but God has saved me.
Yeah, and it's kind of a new life verse. I have have a life verse, but you read something, the Bible's so impactful. There's always a verse that just sticks with you for a while, and that's kind of sticks with me. I really enjoy that verse.
Hmm. How about youth ministry? When did you get involved with the kids?
I started in Awana, the junior high program. So we kind of got involved with that. I enjoyed it. I look back and I wish I could go back and talk to all of them kids again because many times I was so unprepared. When you're maturing as a Christian, a lot of times I was more focused on keeping their attention and keeping them coming every week than I was about impacting them with the word. So yeah, even in areas like that, you look back and say, man, I wish I could do it over again. But it's always a learning lesson, and the Lord uses it. I truly recognize the Lord uses. His word does not come back null and void, and maybe lives were touched, but in spite of me, not because of me. The Lord is a gracious and uses tools that seem to be unfit sometimes for His glory.
It was very popular in the 80s and 90s to do youth ministry a certain way that now, with the benefit of hindsight, like we at RBC would look back and say, yeah, we would never do it that way.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the folks who were really working hard
But
and
we do like
trying,
to eat pizza. I'll just say that for the record.
that's right. We're not anti-pizza. That's not.
Bowling is okay.
Yeah. May it never be that we would say that. But like we don't want to suggest that the people who were like pouring their lives into that are like there's some moral line that's been crossed. We think that, from a tactics perspective, yeah, maybe there's better ways to do some of this. But everybody is sort of speaking in hyperbole, but it seemed like everybody kind of was doing it that way. Just how do I make sure they come back? Is it fun enough that they'll just come back next week?
Yeah.
And that really kind of drives the ministry. And a lot of churches were doing it like that. And, I think we just maybe know a little bit more now about ways that we could do it better. But I don't want to, for whoever's listening to this who may have been involved in that, I don't want to throw rocks at them, because kind of everybody was doing it like that. Everybody just felt like this is the best way to go about it.
Well, and the Lord uses like straight lines with crooked sticks, right?
Right.
Like the things that we do poorly, God uses those things, So I know there's people in our church. There's one family in particular that grew up coming to the youth ministry under Chad and Lyman, that are married now with a bunch of 6 kids, and they come to church. They came back to church later, after almost all of their kids were born. They were in a different church, but they came here because they knew, primarily because they knew both the other 2 elders, not me, but Chad and Lyman at the time, that they knew their character, and so when they came, they knew the type of place it would be based on the character of the guys that had been their youth leaders in high school.
Yeah. And I'm kind of drawn to the youth. There's something about, and I always say this. So youth, especially the high school age, can spot a hypocrite a mile away. You cannot go into junior high and high school kids and teach something that you're not living out. And if so, you better be quick to share your struggle. So, I'm a misfit, just like every teenager thinks they are. So I'm quick to be transparent.
You're the genuine article.
Yeah. I share my struggles. I share my challenges. And I think that's a draw to them. So, word of advice to anyone who's going to stand up in front of kids, especially older youth, high school, junior high age. If you're not living it out, they're going to spot you a mile away.
Yeah.
They just have that gift, and they're going to call you out on it. So, I'm transparent. If I have a challenge, if I have a struggle, if something's going on in my life, first 5 minutes Sunday school class, we talk about it. Here's where I messed up, or here, what's cool. I start out with what's exciting in your life right now. So it's usually any speeding tickets or anybody wrecked this week.
Who got busted?
Yeah,
in the last 7 days.
I'm glad you mentioned Sunday school, because I was wondering what's the timeline between going from Awana helper to Sunday school teacher. What's kind of the steps to getting there in your history?
So when Logansville was real small, and we went through our own challenges, and a lot of it was, and I think all small churches deal with this. You don't have the manpower to facilitate. So, anyone who rose their hand to volunteer to teach something, the job was pretty much yours. I mean, unless your name was in the paper the week before, you got the job. And that's probably, there was a need, and I thought, yeah, I could do that. And I think that's where it starts. At least that's where it started for me. There was a need. We got in there. And again, I would never say I was a great Sunday school teacher. I learned a lot of stuff along the way. teaching any class can go a direction that you didn't plan. I could share many times when in my head, I pull out a couple scripture and I line up, here's how the class is going to go. Well, then one kid throws a monkey wrench in it, and then I'm sitting there going, I don't even know what to do now. Like, this kid has a legitimate concern, and I wasn't ready for that. So I think maybe you don't, but I do. I learned stuff the hard way.
Yeah.
And you just gotta, let the Lord prepare your heart. So many times, and you all teach, this. A class that you're teaching doesn't go the direction that you'd planned on to, but it was a great class. It was like, wow, the Lord did something that I wasn't ready for. And many times I prepare something that's going to be, they're all going to be on their knees praying when I'm done because it's that great, and it bombs. It's like, that was the worst class ever. So, that's maturing over years and years of just teaching any class.
Yeah.
Well, so something that goes through my mind is that there's so many people who they develop these different philosophies of youth ministry, or they have these hard lists of do's and don'ts, and a lot of it comes down to I think folks have forgotten how young people think and what they're interested in and how they operate. And one of these, so I think the way that a lot of these big program-based methods have come about is because I think there have been leaders who have been afraid to teach the Bible to young people. And so I'm curious, and I'd like for you to talk more about this, but like, how do you structure, because you're obviously not using some big high-level curriculum in your Sunday school. You guys are reading the Bible and teaching the Bible.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a great point. And it's too bad it took me so long to get there, because I thought I had to have applications and all kinds of stuff to bring into class, when really all we need is scripture, because how we crave it, even these young men and young women, they desire it just as much. So, here recently, I went through the GE Power Company books, so Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and so we had a little discussion during that. So last week we did predestination, and these were topics that I didn't do when I was their age, but they adhere to it, and the Bible is what it is. It is food for every being that Christ has become a part of, and we have, we don't always come to conclusions, but we have great interaction with each other. So predestination, we closed the book on that last week, and this week we're going to roll right into did God create Satan, and did God create evil, and did God create sin? And a marvelous thing that comes out of when you study like that. So back to predestination.
Nobody's going to be in your class this week, Lee. Everybody's going to be out.
Easy breezy questions like, where did evil come from?
All the adults are going to be in the annex.
So even back to predestination. So the marvelous thing is the questions that come out of that. So when you say, yes, we are predestined, and a lot of people, and I am just as guilty as this, I remember believing that predestination is the fact that God is omniscient and all-knowing, and he was able to look down the tunnel of time and see who was going to pick him, and that's who he picked. So
Retroactive
I'm
picking.
guilty. I at one time that was my belief, but that's not predestination. So when you talk about predestination, the question that will always come up is like, so if God predestined those to be part of his family, he had to, in a literary sense, choose those who were not going to be it. And that's a great question to come from the kids, and it just furthers your study, it furthers questions down the line. And you think that maybe, what are we going to do when we preach to the whole Bible? Well, you can't, because it is so rich, and it just builds upon itself. And, it took me a long time to realize we can do that even with our youth group. And they take it in. They're going to be wiser and smarter than I ever was at their age, and they're going to impact the world in a positive way.
Now, I had another question that was, and I keep hogging the question time, but there's a big chunk of the story I think that has gone unsaid so far, and that would be how you became an elder at Logansville a very long time ago, because that's obviously a big part of your life, your ministry, your testimony as well.
Yeah.
How did you come into that
Okay.
office?
It was it was truly a trial by fire, and maybe at the time I wasn't qualified, but I definitely I look back and see the challenges and struggles that Logansville was going through at a certain time. We were actually going through a split. We had a pastor who, I don't want to point a finger, but it felt like sides were being picked and lines were being drawn, and the church was being split. And leaders, no one wants to be part of a church in that situation.
Right.
Hey, we need an elder, we need to think it's not, me. I kind of stepped up and not boldly and not arrogantly, but very hesitantly. At the time, we had another elder, Charlie Davis, and I really admired Charlie. He stuck it out through some hard times, and I remember having to meet with a pastor and talk about some hard things. I remember, I didn't want to do it. I mean, I didn't want to go talk to the pastor. I didn't, because I had some tough things to discuss. And I remember driving to the church. And, as I'm driving there, I had to, encourage myself to go in and talk. And you have to do this. This is biblical. And I remember seeing his car wasn't there, and I was kind of like, all right. But I told the Lord I was going to go in, so, all right. So I went into the church and looked around, and he wasn't there. And myself, I'm going, I came, Lord. I told you this.
I did my part.
Walk out. He walks in. So we had to have some hard discussions, and whether I look back and whether I was fit to be an elder at the time, I was pretty young. If I can't remember how young I was in my 30s. Even today, if a church
We would never have an elder in their 30s today.
Outrageous.
Terrible decision. You will regret
It's
it.
the worst decision anyone could ever make.
But again, it's a hindsight thing. It wasn't until later on I was able to look back and see the Lord, tested me in many ways, and I hope I never be tested again. I have through that time I had the opportunity to get up and preach, which was unbearable for me. But at the time, this is truly amazing. As the pastor left, and Charlie and I were there by ourselves, and we struggled to find a pastor to come and fill a pulpit for a church who's struggling, and it seems like people can't get along. Charlie and I kind of looked at each other without words, kind of said, "This is our job. This is." And we stepped up, and through all that, I would say some of the greatest life lessons I've learned is that the Lord handed us His church, and it's still His church. And I don't mean that to be an arrogant way.
Yeah.
But to go up there and stand behind the pulpit, and the Lord truly led me. He led Charlie. We preached. Through all that, I have so much admiration and respect for Pastor Dana and Ben and anyone who gets up and preaches at a church, because the time came when the Lord literally said, "All right, Chad, you're done." He gave me the church and He took it away in a sense to say, "You're not called." And I remember preaching a couple of times, and a couple of people would come to the church, and we're starting to draw back together, and people would say, "Hey, good morning, Pastor Lump," and I would, and I'm like any other guy. I got an ego, so I'm thinking, well, maybe I can do this, and a couple approached me, but the Lord was adamant. He said no, and he removed me. He removed Charlie, and He brought in what we needed at the time. And so valuable life lessons that I will take to my dying day that maybe some people don't ever experience. But so much growth And again, it's you look back and you see the growth. You didn't feel it at the time; it was tough. But through there, that's how I became an elder, because they needed one, almost like they needed a teacher at the time as well.
I think it's a good point, that the Lord equipped you for that time. I've said before, so I preach most weeks, but um, I'm not a gifted, I'm not natural at public speaking. So I hate doing announcements and things that are not preaching because it's not my thing. I wouldn't be up front if I didn't have to be. And but the Lord works through, um and he's called me to be the regular preacher here. And so I'm just doing what he tells me to do, right? So, but I think what you said about the Lord equipping you for that is important. It's him. It's not me. I'm
Yeah.
not anything. I'm just trying to be obedient to him, and as you were saying.
Yeah. So the analogy I like to use is like an EMT and a doctor. So at the time, I was just I would look at myself as an EMT, trying to help get this church to the hospital, and a pastor is a doctor. They both have jobs, but they can't. They're not interchangeable. So the Lord uses who He wills to do His will.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good analogy. So why did you, maybe you kind of covered this, but through all those difficulties, of those years, why did you and Annette stay? Like, why didn't you just say, you know what, we could just go somewhere else where we don't have to deal with all this?
That's a great question, because there were Sundays we pulled up in front of the church and didn't even want to go in. I mean, and I don't say that for me. I'm sure there were lots of people at the time who
Right.
felt the exact same way. A lot of people were, it was a pruning process, but there was always growth. The youth group, believe it or not, was still going pretty strong. The Awana program was still going pretty strong when it initiated. Now it did die off there at the end. Like, I think, I don't know if there's a lot of Awana programs anymore anyhow, but um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why we stuck it out. We saw, there were still loving hearts there. The word was still being preached. There was no um, misleading of doctrine. We didn't stray from the Bible. Um, I like to call it a pruning process. We were being pruned. We were doing things that we, as Redemption Now, um, well, that used to be Logansville. We're still part of Logansville. We grew into where we're at now. When I think of our annual meetings and us gathering together to vote on certain things that we should not have been voting on.
Yeah.
So, I think the Lord has to show us sometimes what's broken so we can fix it. If that's a good analogy. So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
staying wasn't great. But we never really thought about leaving. We mainly just thought about not going that Sunday.
What's been your what's your perspective on how um your role within the church has changed over time, responsibilities that have come and gone over the course of all these seasons? What's the Do you have any particular insight for not just for elders or anybody holding an office within the church, but even just um, the members, as the church continues to change, and you've seen a lot of change over time. What encouragement or even warnings would you give for anybody sitting in the church and watching God grow it or God prune it? Um,
Um, uh, I think we have and I'm not just blowing smoke for you guys, but I think we have a fabulous team of elders that truly love and desire the Lord and have no self-interest in mind. So when I think of Lee, when I think of Steve, when I think of Ron and Ben and Pastor Dana, we all have strong opinions. We all look at things differently. But when we gather in a room, we hear each other, and there's no, one of you could be way off of what I'm thinking, but there's no mockery. I truly value your opinion.
Well,
there's no
Good
mockery
nature.
there.
Yeah.
It might be after the meeting.
But I don't know if you shared this or not, but the great story of how we became redemption and getting the building.
Yeah.
Is that, I'm just a little small part of the story, and someday the Lord's going to be done with me, and I'm fine with that. I get it. Our prayer in many aspects. So when you think of when we got the new building, 2 weeks before we broke ground, none of us were looking to buy a church. I mean, none of us. But I remember our prayer. Our prayer was, let us recognize the door that God opens, and let us have the faith to walk through it. And that ever since then, that has been so impactful in my own life to recognize a door that the Lord has opened. And not only in my life, but be able to look at other people and see the doors opening for them.
Yeah.
So when I look at our church and congregation, and I see doors opening, and I see our families growing, and I see others getting involved in ministry, it just blows me away. The Lord is so gracious to us, and we just want His eyes to see these doors that open, and again, the faith to walk through. We harp on this all the time, but it always put a smile on your face when we think of back in Logansville with no children. We had 3 kids, and we literally were praying for more kids. And now we joke about maybe we should stop praying.
Maybe, who's still praying for all these kids?
Somebody says vans full of kids and a prayer, and everybody laughs.
Yeah.
We all know.
Be careful what you ask God for.
Yeah, it's a true story. I remember in the first year that I was here. So Chad was here long before me. The first year that I was here, I just remember after church, usually Chad would do the final benediction prayer, and I would go to the door, and I almost had to run because people were just getting up and leaving like right away. So I had to kind of go back there quickly if I wanted to talk to people. And so when I think of the church a decade or more ago and the church today, where people hang out for, an hour after church, even when there's not a lunch, an hour or whatever after church talk. I left on Sunday. There were people here talking, and we had lunch. Like, I wasn't the last one out the door, and people were just here talking. Other people were cleaning up stuff and serving. And it's a not only are the people different, right? The church has grown numerically, but it's just this growth and a genuine love for one another. When you think about my early years, or even the years before I was there, and sort of the contention in the church and just the strife and struggle that people had, I remember thinking, I think they love each other, but I don't know that they really like each other. They've been through this difficulty together.
Those are 2 different things.
Yeah, and now we see genuinely.
Can't get them to go home now.
Right? Yeah.
It's like, hey, it's 4:00 in the afternoon.
They're going to be here for the evening service soon.
That's right.
Get out of here. And that's all the Lord's doing. He's done all of that.
Yeah. Sometimes we just got to get out of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that's even how I view like just church programs in general. One of the things I've appreciated about Logansville, and then becoming RBC before I was an elder, and then currently as well, is just how there are churches that are program driven, but then there are churches that will implement a program when the need arises. So if there is a need, or if there's a certain group that's beginning to coalesce around a certain thing, whether it's a certain doctrine that they want to study together, or whether it's a club that wants to meet just for particular fellowship with a small group of people, that thing then comes to fruition, and then is supported. But we don't have to do this top down. Oh, we're creating this club, we're creating this special study, and if you want to come on over, and we're trying to like force our way into something. I've always appreciated that kind of organic growth of programs and groups, or whatever things you want to talk about, particular ministries. They've sprung up naturally and organically out of paying attention to the needs or the desires within the church.
Yeah, I also to jump on that, I also see people being an integral part in other people's lives in our church.
Mhm.
10 years ago, when we didn't have so many people, you knew everybody in the church. You saw them at ball games and you talked to them. And now we're much bigger. And sometimes it takes me 3 or 4 weeks to talk to someone to get the opportunity to talk to someone
Yeah.
who started coming, but I haven't got a chance to meet him. But the others are gathered around and talking to him, and we're becoming an integral part of each other's lives, trying our best to get involved in this. And back to the discussions after church, people are eager to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And be friendly. And, even our youth group. So we don't technically have a youth group per se where we have special meetings and stuff. But I would say our youth are so active together. We couldn't have one because they're busy doing their things on their own.
Yeah.
Which I love. I love when, so and so was with so and so, and they did this. Like, that's great. That's a youth group in itself. So I think we have a great Sunday school time. I'm not just talking about youth, but the adults and the young kids. I think that is so vital, and where we don't necessarily have to have a Wednesday gathering of bring all the kids in, let's put something together, because I think we do quite a bit there with Sunday school and with the church service, and they do quizzing and other activities on their own, and they hang out together, which I think a lot of growth comes from.
Yep. Yeah, and whenever we try to, like, we have tried to program something here and there over the years, it never really works. At least not for any length of time, right? But like the kids hanging out in youth group or in Sunday school, and then becoming friends and hanging out, and these young men in particular, we have this group of young men that are now in their the older ones are in their 20s and getting married, and they're all still in the church, and they're all still friends, and even though their lives are changing, right? They're getting married, having kids, but they're a part of one another's lives. It's not they're not running off to some other place because it's cooler down the street. They're here because they love one another.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I hope that answered your question, Lee. I forget what it was, but I ran
It did.
Well,
I'm plumb out of questions.
Well, if any more pop up, thanks for having me. It was a joy to be on it. And if more questions pop up, I'd gladly answer them.
I really hope this episode will satisfy the maddening crowds of people that have demanded for Chad airtime.
Hey, now, when I come on, am I going to have like intro music? Because I've got some if you do.
I'll play the legally allowed snippet. Just send me your tunes. We'll splice it in. Make sure we don't get taken down on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like walk on music. I think it's Nothing But a Good Time by Poison, which is probably the only time
I'll roll with that.
I thought it was going to be Sister Christian.
Oh, okay. Oh, way to make it spiritual,
I'm just
Lee.
Oh, there you go.
It could have been worse. I could have. Well, anyway, I could have put some ACDC in there.
No, no, no.
Kept it G rated.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
what are you
Lee,
teaching in Sunday school this Sunday? It's a big Q&A, or
Yeah,
do you have it?
it's so we finished several books, so we're taking a little break, and mainly because I don't know what to teach next. I haven't decided. So we're going to keep it kind of topical for a little bit. So this come off of predestination is, did God create Satan? Did God create evil? And did God create sin? That's kind of a discussion starter. So we'll go in loaded with scripture, and we'll see where this goes. So more likely, more questions will come, and we'll just dig deeper. So then that's fun.
that's good.
It's so interesting because when you were talking about your predestination week, I'm pretty sure that ended up being the same week that we also talked about predestination in adult Sunday school. So
Wow.
it seems like something is happening.
Yeah.
Was
yeah.
that foreordained?
Because
Must be.
who would have thought?
Mhm.
Maybe God planned it all and is executing it perfectly.
Perfectly.
Well, we are back for what would this be, like season 2, season 3 of Redemption Meditations? So
Probably
please
season
send
three.
in your questions. I've got a few that are coming in. Chad asked one about emotions, mental health, and salvation that we need to discuss at some point.
Mhm.
So
I've
please,
challenged a few individuals to put their card in the box
yeah,
because that is how your questions arrive at the top of the list.
that's right. If it comes into the building, you can send them in via, message or email or whatever, but if they come in the building, they get to the top of the list.
Yep.
I really want to spoil one of them right now that
Uh-oh.
I know of ahead of time. I really want because I want to ask Chad specifically actually, but
All right, go for it.
should I do it? Is that disloyal?
No, we can cut this out.
Okay, Chad, do you think Judas could be the Antichrist?
Do I think Judas could be the Antichrist?
Judas.
First, I'd have to say that's the first time I've ever heard of that question.
Yeah.
I would have to, for the sake of people watching this, I'm going to have to ponder that without an answer.
Well played, sir.
Like he's resurrected? Is that what the behind, because he committed suicide?
There
Um,
are some
I've
there
never
are
heard that
several prominent historical Reformed writers that posited that idea. Not that simply that he was an Antichrist in the sense of like the spirit of Antichrist, but actually like the son of perdition, meaning more than just, leading Jesus to the cross, but actually the last man of perdition. That like
Are they
he would,
saying like almost like this
like that he's a
a
demon.
fallen angel, demonic made flesh?
Yeah.
Are they going that far?
Yeah.
So, wouldn't this lead to other questions in eschatology?
Yes.
So that's why I want to steer clear for now.
We're only on chapter 9. We've got a long ways to go before we wrap up our current sermon series.
I've never heard that before. That's an interesting question.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've never heard it either.
I hadn't either until the
and I
person
know
who
how
I'll leave nameless until they turn their card in, but I thought it was very thought provoking.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll make my wheels in my head turn.
Hmm.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna lob that bomb in there and we'll shut it
This will all
down.
be in the director's cut of this episode, maybe
right.
not the public. Yeah. Or maybe. Who knows?
All right, Lee. I think we're ready.
Bless us.
It's been a long time. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Amen.
Amen.